Hello, I'm Robert, a voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. So, this is a story that I've just got lots of emails about, messages about it, and it's a made-up, it's a fabrication, and you need to watch out for this. Journalists often embellish stories. So this is a claim that Trump asked Zelensky if he can hit Moscow or St Petersburg, with the implication being that he was suggesting to Zelensky that he would actually hit these places. And you can tell immediately this can't be a true story if you've been following this at all closely, which of course most of the reporters haven't, or they've forgotten. So I just show down here, if you look at the kind of thought bubbles, if you imagine what they would be thinking. So Vladimir, can you hit Moscow? Can you hit St Petersburg too? And Zelensky would be thinking, have you forgotten about the May 9th parade? We were just talking about this a couple of months ago. And Trump is thinking, why am I asking this? I know that Ukraine has hit Moscow and St Petersburg many times. If you imagine the sort of thoughts, if they would say such bizarre things. And then Zelensky replies, according to the Financial Times, absolutely, we can if you give us the weapons. Then if you go and look how he'd be thinking about that. Why am I saying this? I don't need any new weapons to hit Moscow. And Trump is also not a combatant, so he shouldn't ask this question. I do need new missiles, but never use them to target civilians or the Russian government. So that's why it can't be a real conversation. Details are all just made up to tell the story. They're just embellishments, added either by the informants or the journalists themselves. So they likely did discuss long-range missiles like the ATACMS and perhaps Chasimer. But Trump would ask Zelensky what he wants to target. He wouldn't tell Zelensky what to target because that would make the US a combatant. So he'd never do that. And then Zelensky would ask for the long-range missiles for sensible, legitimate military targets, such as the airfields close to Ukraine that Russia uses to launch glide bombs at Ukraine. It does that every day. Russia is launching these fighter jets with these multi-ton glide bombs, which they then drop at Sumy City or Kharkiv City. So the airfields that Russia launches these fighter jets from, they are legitimate targets, as are the fighter jets when they're waiting there with the bombs attached to them, just ready to launch. Of course they're legitimate targets, because they're according to law of war, because they're just going to take off in order to attack Ukraine, and the only way that Ukraine can stop these glide bombs is by destroying the fighter jets that drop them. So those are legitimate targets. Another legitimate target, if they could reach that far, would be the Shahed drone factories. So those are the sort of things that Zelensky would ask for, and Trump would never say to Zelensky, you should do this, because he'd know full well that that would make him a combatant in the war. And so now, if we go and look, so I thought I'd say that first, and then if you go and look at this, I mean, how short are the memories of these journalists? Or did they not run this story? Because this is the May the 9th parade, and that's the shelter that they ran stories about, saying that Putin built this shelter to shelter the dignitaries from Ukrainian drones. And there was a big hoo-ha about that. I was having to help people who were scared because of all these stories about possibly Ukraine hitting the parade with drones. That's in Moscow itself. And Ukraine, Zelensky never did. He had a conversation with Trump just before the parade, and this was never reported that they said anything about it, but it's very likely that the topic of Ukraine hitting the parade came up in that conversation, and Zelensky would surely have said no, because after that he didn't target it. But this was just private, and they didn't tell Russia that, if they did have a private conversation about that. So during the parade, Putin had this protection just in case something was to try to hit the parade, and maybe a drone was shot down, and the debris fell on the people watching, or something like that. Which is the very reason why Ukraine would be very cautious about doing something like that. And Zelensky did actually hit something very close to Ukraine, to Moscow, just the day before the start of Trump. So Ukraine actually said at the time it could hit the parade easily. I should do a spell check of that. And that the Secretary of Ukraine and Ukraine's Committee on National Security and Defence said that that although Russia will pull air defences from throughout other parts of Russia to the Red Square to protect it, that Ukraine has the proven ability to go through those air defences. And they have indeed shown that many times. If they fired enough drones at the parade, they could have got through, even with them pulling back all the air defences to protect the Red Square. And Russia was well aware at the time, and so they said, the head of Kremlin, this was Ukraine reporting, and this is reports from what the Russian government did. They ordered hundreds of public sector employees to give up their days off and watch the skies over the capital for Ukrainian drones, to record and report any flying objects. And this is how Ukraine did target the airbase of the Russian Air Force's elite aerobatic demonstration teams on 7th of May. And that's a legitimate target because they're combat-capable fighter jets, and that's only less than 60 kilometers, I think, from Moscow, very close. And so now if we go down and look here, this is when Ukraine struck a major oil refinery in Moscow, and that was on September the 1st in 2024, widely reported by the mainstream media. A big barrage of drones, and one of them got through and hit this oil refinery, which is a valid military target because it supplies oil to the war, and also the revenue for it funds the war. So Ukraine has been targeting Moscow with valid targets for a very long time, many months, and Trump knows that full well. The journalists, if they were following this, should know this too. So this conversation doesn't make any sense. Trump would never ask that question. So now, it's possible that Trump asked as a reminder, can you ask hit Moscow? And Zelensky just said, yes, we can. But that would be valid for him to say that, just as a reminder, but both sides would know full well, and maybe lead on to some other conversation from that. But not to try and encourage Russia to hit Moscow, Zelensky to hit Moscow. And so remember that Trump, one of these reporters asked Trump specifically, should Zelensky target Moscow? Now remember, in these press briefings, they have to be very short, and they can't go into all this that I just explained. Said, are you stupid or something? Ukraine's been targeting Moscow for, after this story is just broken in the Economic Times, claiming that he told Ukraine to hit Moscow. The only thing he can really say is no, he shouldn't do that, because the whole background to this is the reporters all thinking of this in terms of him hitting, telling Zelensky to hit Putin or to hit civilians, or hit something completely unjustified in Moscow. And of course, Zelensky must never do that, and Trump would never tell Zelensky to do that. But he's never would never tell Zelensky that it's wrong to hit the Moscow oil refinery, or he certainly wouldn't. He didn't tell him. There's some conversation about that, but Ukraine is regularly hitting oil refineries, and Trump has never said anything there's anything wrong with hitting oil refineries. So I don't think he'd ever tell Zelensky that it was wrong to hit the Moscow oil refinery. So he's just looking at things that harm civilians. That's his concern, and wanting to stop the war, because that then ends all killing whatsoever, and any deaths of soldiers on either side, and that is Trump's top priority. So this is a ludicrous story, and this is about how it's clear that they're not talking about the oil refinery, which is a valid requirement, and from the Economics Times story, which I'll come to in a minute, how the Economics Times put it, the claim was that Trump was asking Zelensky if he could terrorize Moscow and St Petersburg in the same way that presumably that Russia is firing bombs at civilians in, for instance, the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. Now, Trump could never ask that. So lots of people get very confused that I help. So they think, well, surely if Russia is hitting civilians in Ukraine, then Ukraine has every right to hit civilians in Russia. That is not true. That is absolutely incorrect. That is very false and very illegal if Ukraine was to do that. Russia illegally hitting civilians in Ukraine does not make it even remotely legal for Ukraine to hit civilians in Russia. Both are illegal. And so this is from Médecins Sans Frontières. So this is what's called a reprisal. Now, a reprisal is legal in war to a military attack. You can do a reprisal to military attack so long as you can do a reprisal as long as your target is military. As long as you're hitting a military target on their side and you've minimized the risk to civilians. It is completely prohibited to do reprisals against civilians or civilian objects, like the Kremlin say, civilian objects or the government, and for persons and objects and churches and things like that, museums, anything like that. It's completely illegal to target something like that as a reprisal. No matter what the other country does to you, you must never do that. You mustn't harm wounded, sick, shipwrecked persons, medical, religious personnel. If you've got a pilot who, if they are a paratrooper, they're a legitimate target. But if you shoot down a plane and the pilot drops out in a parachute, they are not a legitimate target because they're no longer competent at that point, because they are the pilot of the fighter jet, and the fighter jet is destroyed. As soon as the fighter jet is destroyed, the pilot on the parachute is no longer competent. So that is how this works. So that would make Trump aware. So now look at the embellished story. So I thought I'd give you the background first, and then show you the story. And now, when you hear a story like this again in the future, you will know it must be embellished. It can't be correct. I knew that instantly because of this background. I didn't need to think, I didn't need to look anything up. I immediately knew this is an embellished story, it can't be true. And then, just an hour or so later, then there were these stories breaking saying it's a false story, which it obviously was for anyone who knew the background. So Trump knows, so it must be embellished. Trump knows that Ukraine has hit Moscow and St Petersburg numerous times. And then it must be embellished because against the law of war, that Trump supposedly said to Zelensky they must make Russians feel the pain and force Kremlin to the negotiating table. That is not permitted. You can't force the other side to the negotiating table by targeting their civilians. That is very illegal. I know that Russia does that. Before every negotiation, it fires missiles at civilians in Kiev, but that's illegal. And it doesn't. Two rights don't make a wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. In international law, it remains very illegal, and the United States is especially careful in training their soldiers. I talked on my previous debunk about that, which I might do a video about that too. They train their soldiers at every level, and the 4-star general has had this annually been trained in it. They probably are, by that point, they have likely trained soldiers themselves, and they have paralegal experts that advise them, and they would get them involved in any conversation with the president. So the United States is very, very strong on keeping to the law of war. So, so now what else have we got? That's my previous video. This is all that I need to, and that is the previous thing about the how, in actual fact, the way that Zelensky did not target. So a lot of people were saying to Zelensky, but saying beforehand, surely Zelensky will at least do something during this parade, at least try and embarrass Putin in some way, or just some minor thing, just even something that flies over and photographs the parade from above. But no, he didn't do a thing. Putin asked for a truce, a 3-day truce. Russia didn't keep to it. They fired some missiles at Ukraine, but Ukraine did keep to this truce and kept it very clearly, as well as they could, except they couldn't along the very front line. And Zelensky said, look, we must expand this to a 30-day truce. And he said to Putin, look, if you can do a truce for 3 days, you can surely do one for 30 days. And that was the start of all this. It's got Trump coming over to Zelensky's side and saying, look, Zelensky is really looking for peace. So what Zelensky did then was very far-sighted into the future. So you have a read of that, and then you can have a read of here about how Trump is my previous video talking. I might do a video about that too. So anyway, hopefully this helps, and let's just end on this slide here. So no, there's no way that he did that. Oh no, let's end on this. It says should not. If I just turn this down, Trump says Zelensky should not target Moscow. That is the Sky subtitle, and that's him actually doing. I'm not going to. I could play it maybe very quietly. If you just watch.
Is that why you gave him more weapons?
Yeah, it just said you shouldn't target Moscow. So there you go. So I'll upload this to my channel, and I'll put a link to this in the video description, and hope this helps some of you who've got scared by this completely false, embellished story.